Hey, cripple, make room for people who can walk. The shout echoed across the crowded diner. All eyes turned toward the man in the wheelchair, struggling to arrange his meal tray. Nobody intervened. A young couple snickered. Others whispered disapprovingly. Then a man from the back of the room stood up, throwing his cap onto the table. I'm a colonel in the United States Army. Everyone, silence. Do you believe honor should be defended to the end? Type honor to stand with those who serve. Thomas Ray was a 74-year-old veteran who had served with distinction in Afghanistan and Iraq. His weathered face and calloused hands told stories his quiet demeanor rarely shared. 20 years ago, during his final deployment, he had lost his right leg below the knee when he ran into a building rigged with explosives to pull out two wounded soldiers. After his discharge, Thomas lived modestly on his military pension. He seldom ventured out, except on special occasions when he would visit Ryan's Diner, a small establishment near the edge of town where his old unit used to gather when they were home on leave. Many had since passed on or moved away, but Thomas maintained the tradition, finding comfort in the familiar surroundings that held echoes of laughter and camaraderie from decades past. On this particular Tuesday, Thomas had carefully dressed in his old jacket with 3rd Infantry, retired, embroidered above the pocket. He maneuvered his wheelchair through the morning drizzle to catch the community bus into town. The driver recognized him, offering a respectful nod as he lowered the accessibility ramp. At Ryan's Diner, Thomas chose his usual spot near the window, where the light was good and he could watch people pass by. Susan, a waitress who had worked there for 15 years, greeted him with genuine warmth. "Your usual, Sergeant Ray?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Thomas nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, Susan. And maybe some extra napkins today." He set his tray down carefully, positioning his coffee cup away from the edge. His hands weren't as steady as they once were, and the modest disability accommodations at the diner still left much to be desired. But Thomas never complained. At the adjacent table sat a group of well-dressed young professionals, laughing loudly over some shared joke as they typed on sleek laptops. When Thomas fumbled with the sealed water bottle Susan had brought him, his arthritic fingers struggling with the twist cap, one of the men glanced over with visible annoyance. "Why don't they stay in nursing homes where they belong?" he muttered, loud enough for Thomas to hear. A young woman in the group giggled. "Or maybe he's just pretending to be a veteran for the senior discount." Thomas heard every word, but his expression remained unchanged. During his 27 years of service, he had faced enemy fire, lost brothers in arms, and woken up without his right leg in a military hospital. Words could no longer wound him, at least that's what he told himself. He continued eating slowly, methodically, the way he did everything these days. A new server, barely out of high school, approached Thomas with hesitation. "Excuse me, sir, but are you actually a veteran? Because if not, I'm supposed to tell my manager." Thomas nodded patiently, reaching for his wallet to produce his faded military ID. The young server examined it with obvious skepticism, his eyes flicking between the card and Thomas, as if trying to reconcile the proud soldier in the photo with the aged man in the wheelchair. Throughout the diner, other patrons glanced over, their expressions a mixture of indifference, impatience, and in some cases, poorly disguised contempt. A child pointed, only to have his mother quickly pull his hand down, whispering a scolding that seemed more about etiquette than respect. And so Thomas sat there, a man who had once carried a wounded comrade through gunfire on his shoulders, silently enduring the subtle indignities of invisibility and doubt, the silent judgment of a world that had forgotten what sacrifice looked like when it wasn't wrapped in ceremony and convenient narratives. He took another bite of his meal, his gaze drifting to the small memorial wall near the register where Ryan's Diner displayed photos of local service members. His own picture was there, yellowed with age, showing a younger Thomas standing tall in his uniform, both legs still intact, eyes bright with purpose. No one had made the connection. One of the young professionals, a man in an expensive suit, rose from his table and approached Thomas. He placed his hand possessively on the back of Thomas's wheelchair. "Listen, old-timer, you've been here long enough. This is our regular table for afternoon meetings, and we need the space." Thomas looked up calmly, his voice steady despite the public confrontation. "I'm still eating my meal. I'll be happy to leave when I'm finished. The man's face darkened. With a deliberate motion, he pushed Thomas's wheelchair back from the table, causing the tray to slide forward. Thomas's lunch, a simple turkey sandwich and soup, crashed to the floor. Coffee splashed across his pants, and shards of the mug scattered around his wheels. "You think you're special? You're just a cripple taking up space," the man shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. The diner fell silent. A woman at a corner table raised her phone, recording the incident. Others looked away uncomfortably, suddenly fascinated by their own meals. Susan, the waitress, rushed forward, but the damage was already done. Thomas didn't raise his voice or show anger. Instead, he leaned forward with difficulty, picking up pieces of his sandwich from the floor, his weathered hands trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from the arthritis that had settled into his joints over the years. The humiliation hung in the air, thicker than the diner's usual aroma of coffee and grilled onions. No one stood up for him. No one offered to help. Then from the back of the diner, a deep voice cut through the uncomfortable silence. "You just put your hands on the man who saved my life." Every head turned to see a distinguished-looking man with salt and pepper hair rise from his seat. Though dressed in civilian clothes, his military bearing was unmistakable. He walked with measured steps to Thomas's side, pulling out his wallet to reveal an ID card. Colonel Samuel Pierce, United States Army, retired as of 2021. The colonel knelt down to look Thomas in the eye, his voice filled with respect. "Sergeant Ray, I apologize for being late." The young businessman's face paled as realization dawned. Colonel Pierce turned to address him directly, his voice carrying throughout the now silent restaurant. "You see this man as weak? I once watched him carry a soldier weighing over 200 pounds through enemy fire, while I was still frozen behind cover. He didn't stop when bullets hit the wall beside him. He didn't stop when the building started to collapse. He only stopped when everyone else was safe." A young soldier in uniform, quietly eating his breakfast at the counter, stood up and saluted. Then another diner rose, and another. Veterans who recognized the significance of what they were witnessing. Within moments, nearly everyone in the restaurant was on their feet, except for the group of young professionals who now stared at the floor in shame. Susan approached with a new tray of food, tears in her eyes. "On the house, Sergeant Ray. Always has been, always will be." The businessman who had pushed Thomas's wheelchair stammered an apology, but Colonel Pierce cut him off. "Don't apologize to me, and don't apologize to him because you're embarrassed. Apologize because you failed to recognize that freedom isn't free. It's paid for by men and women like Sergeant Ray, who gave pieces of themselves so you could sit here and take your privilege for granted. Some heroes don't need to speak up for themselves. Sometimes, all it takes is one person who knows the truth to step forward and make an entire room fall silent. If you believe that honor doesn't fade with age or ability, type honor in the comments below to stand with those who sacrificed everything for our freedom." The young businessman quietly placed several bills on the table and left the diner, his colleagues following in awkward silence. As the door closed behind them, an elderly woman approached Thomas's table. "My husband was in the 3rd Infantry too," she said softly. "He didn't come home. Thank you for your service, Sergeant." After the incident, Thomas was invited to be the guest of honor at the state's annual Veterans Recognition Ceremony. The video of the diner confrontation had gone viral, accumulating millions of views in just 24 hours. Veterans groups from across the country shared it with messages of solidarity and outrage at how common such treatment had become. Local residents started a petition to dedicate a permanent table at Ryan's Diner as the Ray Table, where no one else would be allowed to sit. The owner, Ryan Davidson Jr., son of the original founder, immediately agreed and commissioned a brass plaque. The dedication ceremony attracted more than 300 people, many standing outside in the rain just to show their support. A regional television station requested an interview with Thomas. The reporter asked the question viewers nationwide were wondering, "Are you angry about how you were treated?" Thomas shook his head, his eyes reflecting not bitterness, but wisdom. "I'm not angry. I'm saddened that they don't understand. Freedom isn't accidental or guaranteed. It's protected by people willing to make sacrifices most never see." Children from local schools sent hand-drawn cards thanking him, many addressing him as Grandpa Hero. One class invited him to speak about his experiences, and Thomas accepted, wheeling himself into a classroom of wide-eyed third graders who fell completely silent when he entered. A form of respect most adults had forgotten how to show. A small girl raised her hand. "Did it hurt when you lost your leg?" Thomas smiled gently. "Yes, it hurt. But you know what would have hurt more? Leaving my friends behind." Though his living situation remained modest, Thomas's life changed in subtle ways. Each time he visited Ryan's diner, someone would pay for his meal. Strangers would approach to shake his hand or simply nod in respect. The invisibility he had experienced for years had been replaced by recognition. Colonel Pierce invited Thomas to serve as an advisor at the Officer Candidate School, where he taught leadership courses. When Thomas arrived for his first session, every candidate stood at attention, though he wore no uniform, carried no rank insignia. A young recruit approached afterward, emotion evident in his voice. "Sir, you're the reason I joined. My grandfather served with you in Iraq." Thomas shook his head slightly. "I'm no role model. I just did what needed to be done when no one else was standing up." During his talk, Thomas shared the story of the day he lost his leg, not focusing on his injury, but on the young private he had gone back for. How the boy had been barely 18, how his eyes had reflected both terror and trust when Thomas reached him. "I didn't think about the risk," Thomas explained. "When someone needs you, you move. That's all there is to it." After his presentation, the Academy commander unveiled a framed photograph of Thomas to be hung in their Hall of Honor, inscribed with words Thomas had spoken. "Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and moving forward anyway." The young businessman who had confronted Thomas at the diner reached out through Colonel Pierce, asking to meet privately. Thomas agreed without hesitation. They met at the diner, at Thomas's regular table. The young man, David, could barely meet his eyes. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he began. Thomas interrupted him gently. "Let me ask you something. What did you learn?" David considered the question carefully. "I learned that I've been blind, that I've judged people by their appearance, their age, their abilities, that I've taken for granted what others paid dearly for." Thomas nodded. "Then something good came from that day, didn't it?" David looked up, surprised. "How can you be so understanding?" "When you've seen the worst humanity has to offer in war," Thomas replied, "you learn to recognize when someone is simply lost, not evil. The question is, what will you do with this lesson?" Within a month, David had started a program pairing young professionals with veterans for mentorship. He named it Visible Heroes, and Thomas agreed to serve on its advisory board. At the next Veterans Day parade, Thomas was asked to lead the procession. As his wheelchair moved down Main Street, people lined the route 10 deep, standing in respectful silence as he passed. Among them were many of the diner's regular patrons, their perspectives forever changed by what they had witnessed, or failed to witness, that day. Every day, Thomas still visited Ryan's diner, sitting at what was now officially the Ray table. A small brass plaque adorned the wall, reserved for Sergeant Thomas Ray, who never needed applause, just a place to sit in peace. The group of young professionals who had once mocked him, after facing public criticism, sent a formal letter of apology. Thomas had refused to press charges or accept their offer of financial compensation. "As long as they learn something, that's payment enough," he told Colonel Pierce. Ryan's Diner incorporated a quote from Thomas into their new menus. "Respect costs nothing, but sometimes it saves everything." On the anniversary of the incident, the diner hosted a special event where veterans from across the state gathered to share meals and stories. Thomas sat at his table, now surrounded by friends both old and new. A young woman approached with her son, a boy of about 7. "My husband is deployed right now," she explained. "Would you mind if my son asks you a question?" The boy looked up at Thomas with solemn eyes. "Were you scared when you were a soldier?" Thomas nodded. "Every day. But being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right even when you are scared." The boy considered this, then asked, "Is it okay to be scared when Dad's away?" Thomas reached out to gently touch the boy's shoulder. "Of course it is, and I bet your dad is counting the days until he can come home to you." The local newspaper published an editorial about Thomas that concluded, "True heroes don't wear capes or medals on their chests. Sometimes they sit quietly in wheelchairs, carrying wounds we cannot see, holding memories we cannot share. Some heroes don't need to stand to be noticed. They sit quietly, but their presence changes the entire room. If you believe kindness and gratitude should be shared more widely, subscribe to TT Hero Stories. TT Hero Stories, because some heroes never stop serving.